Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain beat against the skyscraper's windows as if wanting to wash away all the arrogance that inhabited that 35th floor. Preston Hale stood before the panoramic window, watching Manhattan bow under the weight of gray clouds. The city lights blinked like fallen stars, distant, cold, exactly how he liked to keep the people around him. He adjusted the cuffs of his custom-made Italian shirt, feeling the fine fabric slide against his skin. Everything in his life was planned, controlled, impeccable. At 36, Preston commanded a real estate empire that made other billionaires look like amateurs. He bought entire buildings the way others buy coffee. He closed deals while others were still trying to understand the rules of the game. And love was for the weak, for those who didn't know how to separate emotion from business. Preston had already seen powerful men fall to their knees for women who weren't worth half of what they owned. Pathetic. He swore he would never be like that. The women who crossed his path knew exactly what they wanted from him: money, status, a night between Egyptian silk sheets, and he gave them exactly that, nothing more, nothing less. No promises, no ties, no weaknesses. But that Tuesday morning, something changed. Preston needed a gift for an eccentric European client, a collector of first editions. His assistant suggested a small library in Havenbrook, an insignificant little town 2 hours from New York. "They have a rare collection of classic literature," he'd said. Preston rolled his eyes. Going to a country town because of a book seemed like a waste of time, but the client was worth tens of millions, so he went. Havenbrook was everything he despised: narrow cobblestone streets, old houses with wooden porches, people smiling at each other as if they'd been neighbors for generations. They probably were. The smell of fresh bread came from a bakery on the corner, mixed with the scent of leaves wet from the morning rain. He parked his black BMW in front of a red brick building with a discreet sign: Havenbrook Public Library. The door creaked when he pushed it, and the sound echoed through the place's absolute silence. That's when he saw her. Malene Carter had her back turned, organizing books on a tall shelf. She wore a simple navy blue cotton dress, without any luxury, without any pretension. Her brown hair was pulled back in a loose bun, with some rebellious strands falling over her neck. She was stretching on her tiptoes to reach the highest shelf, and for a moment Preston found himself watching the delicate, almost childlike movement of that gesture. She hadn't noticed him yet. Preston cleared his throat. Maddie turned quickly, almost dropping a book. Her eyes, brown, deep, frighteningly sincere, met his, and something strange happened. She didn't smile with interest. She didn't fix her hair. She didn't try to impress him. She simply asked in a soft but firm voice, "Can I help you?" Preston felt a pang of irritation. He was used to being recognized, admired, desired, but this woman looked at him as if he were just another ordinary visitor. "I'm looking for a first edition of The Great Gatsby," he said, his voice sounding drier than he intended. Maddie nodded and walked to a specific section of the library. He followed her, watching the way she moved unhurried, without theatrics. She seemed to belong to that place, as if she were part of the walls themselves. "Here it is," she said, carefully removing a volume protected by a plastic cover. 1925 edition. One of the few original copies still in good condition. She handed him the book with the same care she would hold something sacred. Preston took the volume. His fingers brushed against hers for a fraction of a second. Maddie pulled her hand back quickly, as if she'd been burned. "Do you read Fitzgerald?" he asked, more out of curiosity than politeness. "I read everything," she replied with a shy smile. "It's an advantage of working here. I can travel anywhere without leaving this room." Preston raised an eyebrow. "Traveling through books? Isn't that kind of limited?" Maddie lifted her chin, and he noticed a spark of defiance in her eyes. Depends on what you consider limited. I prefer the vastness of imagination to the prison of arrogance." He laughed a short, surprised laugh. No one talked to him like that. No one dared. "Touché," he murmured. There was a silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, but charged, as if they were both trying to figure out what was there between them in that tiny space. Preston found himself observing the details. The blue ink stain on her index finger, the simple silver necklace around her neck, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thoughtful. "Are you a virgin?" he asked, suddenly, without thinking, with a challenging smile on his lips. Maddie froze. Her cheeks turned red, and she took a step back. That's none of your business." Preston realized his mistake in the same instant. He had crossed a line, but instead of apologizing, he just watched her, fascinated by the way she defended herself, as if protecting something precious. "You're right," he said, his voice dropping a tone. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." Maddie took a deep breath, regaining her composure. "If you're taking the book, I need to register the sale." He nodded and followed her to the counter. As she filled out the paperwork, Preston couldn't stop looking at her. There was something there, something he couldn't name, a purity he had never seen, a silent strength that disarmed him. When she handed him the receipt, their fingers touched again. This time, neither pulled away immediately. "Thank you," he said, holding the book. "You're welcome," she replied, but didn't smile. Preston left the library with the strange feeling that he had left something behind. He got in the car, placed the book on the seat beside him, and started the engine. But before leaving, he looked in the rearview mirror. Maddie was standing at the door, watching him. And for the first time in years, Preston Hale didn't know what to do. 3 weeks had passed since that encounter at the library, but Preston couldn't get her out of his head. He tried, God knows he tried. He dove into complex negotiations, closed million-dollar deals, had dinner with models who appeared on magazine covers, but nothing worked. In the middle of important meetings, he found himself thinking about Maddie's brown eyes, about the way she had challenged him without fear, about the softness of that voice that sounded like a forgotten melody. This was ridiculous. He was Preston Hale. He didn't get obsessed with women, especially not with a small-town librarian who probably didn't even know how much one of his watches cost. But the obsession remained, stubborn as a scar that refused to fade. That's when the invitation arrived, a charity event at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, organized by one of New York's leading cultural foundations. Preston normally ignored this kind of thing. Social events were just showcases of hypocrisy, where the rich pretended to care about causes while flaunting their jewelry and designer clothes. But this time, something made him accept. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the restlessness that had taken hold of him in recent weeks. Or maybe it was fate preparing the next move on the board. The night of the event arrived with a cold autumn breeze. The museum was stunning, illuminated by crystal chandeliers that made the works of art shine like treasures kept in a sacred temple. Men in tuxedos and women in haute couture dresses circulated among champagne glasses and empty conversations. Preston wore an impeccable black suit, custom-made by an Italian tailor. He had the posture of someone who knew he was being watched and liked it. He took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and walked toward the main hall, greeting acquaintances with brief nods and calculated smiles. Everything was predictable. Everything was controlled until he saw her. Preston stopped in the middle of the hall. The glass nearly slipped from his hand. Maddie was on the other side of the room, next to an ancient Greek sculpture. She wore a simple wine-red dress without sparkle, without extravagance, but it fell over her body in a way that took his breath away. Her hair, previously pulled back in a messy bun, now fell loose over her shoulders in soft waves, framing her delicate face. She wasn't wearing expensive jewelry, just the same silver necklace Preston had noticed at the library, and yet she shone brighter than any woman there. Maddie held a glass of red wine but didn't drink. She observed the paintings around her with an expression of genuine fascination, as if she were in a secret sanctuary. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, perhaps from the heat of the room, perhaps from the shyness of being in a place so different from her usual world. Preston felt something tighten in his chest, something he couldn't name. He started walking toward her but stopped when he saw a man, a banker Preston vaguely knew, approach Maddie. The guy smiled exaggeratedly, clearly trying to impress her. Maddie smiled politely, but her body was tense, defensive. Preston felt a wave of irrational anger rise up his throat. He crossed the hall in long strides, his presence cutting through the space like a sharp blade. "Milline," he said, his voice firm and possessive. She turned, and her eyes widened as she recognized him. "Preston." The banker looked from one to the other, sensing the electric tension in the air, and mumbled an excuse before quickly walking away. Maddie took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to see you either," Preston replied, his eyes traveling over her face slowly, as if memorizing every detail. "What are you doing in New York?" "The library where I work received an invitation," she explained, a bit nervously. "They wanted someone to represent the cultural institutions from the countryside. I didn't think I'd come, but my boss insisted." Preston took a step closer, reducing the space between them. He could smell her soft perfume, something floral, discreet, completely different from the intense and expensive perfumes he was used to smelling on other women. "I'm glad she insisted," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Maddie looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity. "You were right last time. I was rude. I shouldn't have." "You were perfect," he interrupted her. "I was the arrogant idiot." She raised her eyes to his, surprised. Preston Hale never apologized, never admitted mistakes. But there he was, vulnerable in a way even he didn't understand. "Do you want to take a walk with me?" he asked, extending his hand. Maddie looked at his hand as if it were a trap. For a moment, Preston thought she would refuse, but then slowly she placed her hand in his. Her skin was warm, soft. Preston felt a shiver run down his spine. They walked together through the museum corridors, passing Renaissance paintings and classical sculptures. Preston normally didn't pay attention to these things. Art was just an investment, a bargaining chip. But with Maddie by his side, everything seemed different. She stopped before each work, reading the informational plaques carefully, making soft comments about colors, techniques, stories behind the paintings. "You really love this, don't you?" he asked, watching the way her eyes sparkled before a Monet painting. "I do," she answered simply. "Art is a way of touching eternity, of understanding that even after we're gone, something of us remains." Preston fell silent, digesting those words. He had never thought of legacy that way. For him, legacy was money, power, buildings with his name engraved on bronze plaques. But maybe there was something more. They reached an isolated balcony overlooking Central Park. The city stretched out below them, a tapestry of lights and shadows. The cold night wind made Maddie's hair dance around her face. Preston turned to her, and suddenly the world seemed to shrink until only the two of them existed. "You scare me," he confessed, his voice low. Maddie blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You make me feel things I swore I'd never feel," he said, taking another step toward her. "You make me question everything, Preston." He didn't let her finish. His hands rose to her face, his thumbs caressing her cheeks with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. And then, without asking permission, without thinking about the consequences, he kissed her. The kiss was impulsive, intense, desperate. Their lips met with a hunger Preston didn't know existed inside him. Maddie was motionless for a second, frozen, shocked, but then slowly she began to respond. Her hands rose to his chest, gripping the fabric of his jacket as if she needed something to hold on to. The taste of her lips was sweet, intoxicating. Preston deepened the kiss, pulling her closer, feeling her body mold to his in a way that felt right, as if they were two pieces that finally fit together. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Maddie looked at him with wide eyes, flushed cheeks, swollen lips. I need to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Maddie, please. I need to think." And then she ran off, leaving Preston alone on the balcony with the taste of her still on his lips and his heart beating irregularly. He leaned against the railing, looking into the emptiness of the night, and realized with frightening clarity that he was completely lost. Preston didn't sleep that night, not the next one, either. He lay in his king-size bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment, reliving that kiss over and over like a movie stuck on loop. The feeling of Maddie's lips against his, the warmth of her body so close, the way she had trembled in his arms, all of it haunted him like a sweet and torturous ghost. He tried to convince himself it was just physical attraction, desire, something fleeting that would disappear once he had her. But deep down, Preston knew he was lying to himself. This was different. She was different. Monday morning, Preston canceled an important meeting and hit the road to Havenbrook. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have excuses, just the urgent need to see her again. When he arrived at the library, it was almost 10 in the morning. The sun came through the tall windows, creating golden rectangles of light on the polished wooden floor. The smell of old paper and fresh coffee hung in the air, familiar and comforting. Maddie was behind the counter, organizing checkout cards. She wore a simple white blouse and a gray skirt to her knees. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She seemed focused, oblivious to the world around her, until she looked up and saw him. Her face lost color for an instant, and then her cheeks turned red. She swallowed hard, pressing the cards against her chest as if they were a shield. "Preston," she said, her voice coming out weaker than intended. "What are you doing here?" He walked to the counter, his hands in his dress pants pockets. "I came to return the book." Maddie frowned. "You bought the book. You don't need to return it." "Then I came to get another one," he replied, a small smile playing on his lips. She crossed her arms, defensive, about what happened at the event. "I've thought about it every day since," Preston interrupted, his voice serious, honest, "and I don't regret it." Maddie looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "Preston, I don't know what you want from me, but I want to know you," he said simply. "I want to know what makes you smile, what makes you wake up in the morning, what book is on your nightstand, whether you prefer coffee or tea, if you've ever watched the sunset without thinking about anything else." She blinked, surprised by his sincerity. "Why?" Preston shrugged, vulnerable in a way he had never been before. "Because for the first time in my life, I care about the answers." There was a heavy silence between them. Maddie bit her lower lip, fighting something inside herself. Finally, she sighed. "I drink tea chamomile before bed, and the book on my nightstand is Persuasion by Jane Austen. I've read it 5 times. Preston smiled a genuine, warm smile. Noted, in the days that followed, Preston became a constant presence at the library. He showed up unannounced, always with a flimsy excuse. Sometimes he pretended he needed a specific book. Other times he said he was in the area on business. Maddie knew they were lies, but she didn't send him away. They talked between the shelves in whispers that echoed through the silence of the place. Preston discovered that Maddie had lost her mother when she was 15 and since then had cared for her sick father until he passed away 3 years ago. She had never left Havenbrook, never traveled, never allowed herself to dream beyond those narrow, familiar streets. "Don't you want to see the world?" Preston asked one day as they leafed through an old atlas together. "I do," she admitted, running her fingers over a map of Italy. "But dreaming is safer than taking risks." What if the risk was worth it? Maddie raised her eyes to his, and Preston saw fear there, but he also saw curiosity, hope. "Maybe someday I'll find out," she whispered. Preston started sending flowers, not extravagant bouquets that screamed money, but simple and delicate arrangements. White daisies, yellow tulips, pink roses. Each delivery came with a handwritten note in his firm and elegant handwriting. "You are the most beautiful silence I've ever found. I thought of you today. Actually, I think of you every day. You make me want to be better than I am." Maddie kept each note in a desk drawer, and at night, when she was alone in her small apartment above the library, she reread them until she had memorized every word. She knew she was falling, and that terrified her. Preston also knew he was falling, but unlike Maddie, he didn't fight it. He surrendered to that new, frightening, and completely addictive feeling. He started sending text messages, not elaborate or seductive messages, but simple and honest thoughts. "Just closed a $50 million deal. But all I want to know is if you're okay. I heard a song today that made me think of you. I don't know why. Maybe because it was beautiful and sad at the same time. I used to laugh at love. Now I wake up wondering if you're smiling or crying without me." Maddie read these messages with a tight chest, her eyes full of tears she didn't fully understand. She didn't know how to respond, so most of the time she just reacted with a heart emoji, small, shy, but true. And for Preston, that small digital heart was worth more than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. One Thursday afternoon, Preston showed up at the library with a package in his hands. Maddie was cataloging new books when she saw him come in. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the package. "Open it," he said, extending the gift. Maddie hesitated but took the package. Inside was a first edition of Persuasion by Jane Austen, the same work she had mentioned days ago. The cover was in perfect condition, carefully preserved over decades. She raised her eyes to him, incredulous. "Preston, this must have cost a fortune. I can't accept this. It has no price for me if it makes you smile," he replied, moving closer to her. "And you deserve to hold in your hands the story you love most." Maddie held the book against her chest, her eyes welled up. "Why are you doing this?" Preston took another step, reducing the space between them until he could feel her breath mixing with his. He raised his hand and, with infinite gentleness, moved a strand of hair that had fallen over her face, tucking it behind her ear. "Because you make me want to be the man who deserves to be by your side," he confessed, his voice vulnerable. "Because you showed me there's beauty in simple things. Because when I'm with you, I'm not the Preston Hale everyone knows. I'm just me." Maddie held her breath. Her heart beat so hard she was certain he could hear it. She wanted to pull back, protect herself, build walls around her heart, but she couldn't. Not when he looked at her that way, as if she were the only real thing in his entire universe. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too," Preston admitted. "But maybe we can be scared together." He tilted his head. His lips were inches from hers, waiting, giving her control, the choice. And then, slowly, Maddie closed the distance between them and kissed him. This time it wasn't an impulsive or desperate kiss. It was soft, tender, full of unspoken promises. It was a kiss that said, "I trust you. I choose you. I want to try." When they separated, Preston rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, savoring that moment as if it were sacred. "You're dangerous, Malene Carter," he murmured. "Why?" she asked, still with her eyes closed. "Because you're teaching me how to feel, and I don't know if I'll survive it." Maddie smiled, and Preston felt as if the sun had risen inside his chest. But neither of them knew that the world out there was about to discover them, and when it did, nothing would be simple anymore. The weeks that followed were like living in a dream from which neither wanted to wake. Preston and Maddie began seeing each other more frequently, but always in secret, always away from the curious and judgmental eyes of the outside world. They created a private universe made of stolen moments and silences loaded with meaning. Preston discovered he could cancel meetings, postpone negotiations, and ignore urgent calls when Maddie was around. He, who had always put work above everything, now found excuses to spend hours in the small Heavenbrook library, sitting in a worn armchair while she worked. Sometimes he just watched her, the way she bit her lower lip when she was focused, the way her fingers glided over book spines with reverence as if each volume were a precious treasure, the soft smile that appeared on her face when she found a book she'd been searching for. "You're staring at me again," Maddie said one day, without even looking up from the card she was filling out. Preston smiled without any shame. "I can't help it." She finally looked at him, her cheeks slightly flushed. "That's unsettling. Would you prefer I stop?" Maddie hesitated, then slowly shook her head. "No, I'm not used to it." Preston got up from the armchair and walked to the counter where she stood. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the wooden surface, bringing his face closer to hers. "Used to what?" "To someone looking at me like I'm important," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. "You're not important, Maddie," Preston said, and saw her expression close off. He immediately reached out and gently touched her chin, forcing her to look at him again. "You're essential. There's a huge difference." The air between them became dense, heavy with unresolved tension. Preston could see the rapid pulse in her neck, could hear her breathing getting faster with each second. He wanted to kiss her right there, pull her onto the counter, and show her exactly how much she meant to him. But he didn't. He was learning to wait, to savor the anticipation. "I have a meeting in New York tomorrow," he said, slowly pulling away. "But I'll be back Friday. Have dinner with me." Maddie blinked, surprised. "Dinner where?" "At my place. I'll cook for you." She laughed a soft, incredulous sound. "You cook?" Preston Hale, the billionaire who probably has 3 personal chefs? 4, actually, he corrected with a mischievous smile. "But I fired them all. I want to make something for you with my own hands." Maddie watched him for a long moment, looking for signs of teasing, but all she saw was raw sincerity. "Okay," she agreed, still somewhat suspicious. "But if you poison the food, I'm going to haunt you." Preston laughed. The sound echoed through the empty library. "Noted." Friday night, Preston sent a car to pick up Maddie. She protested, saying she could drive, but he insisted. When she arrived at his property, a modern house of glass and steel nestled among the mountains an hour from Havenbrook, she was speechless. The house was spectacular but not ostentatious. Large windows overlooked a wooded valley. The decor was minimalist, with touches of warmth here and there. A wool throw tossed over the sofa, books stacked on a side table, a lit fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. Preston waited for her at the entrance, wearing dark jeans and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was barefoot. Maddie had never seen him so human. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand. Maddie placed her hand in his, feeling the familiar warmth that always came with his touch. "Your house is beautiful." "It is now," he replied, pulling her inside. He had actually cooked. The table was simply set. White plates, silver utensils, 2 wine glasses, lit candles creating an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. The aroma of garlic, herbs, and something baking in the oven filled the air. "I hope you like pasta," Preston said, pulling out the chair for her to sit. "I love it," Maddie replied, still trying to process the fact that Preston Hale was personally serving her. Dinner was surprisingly delicious. They talked about everything and nothing. Childhood, forgotten dreams, secret fears. Preston told her about the pressure of growing up in a wealthy family, where affection was currency and love was a sign of weakness. Maddie spoke about the loneliness of losing her parents young, about how books had become her family. "Sometimes I feel like I've lived 1,000 lives through the pages," she said, swirling her wine glass between her fingers. "But I've never lived my own." Preston reached across the table and intertwined his fingers with hers. "Then let's live together. Yours, mine, all of them." After dinner, they sat on the sofa in front of the fireplace. Preston put on a soft playlist, instrumental jazz that filled the silences without invading. Maddie sat beside him, her feet tucked under her body, holding a wine glass. "Can I ask you a question?" she said suddenly. "Any question." "Why me? You could have any woman you wanted. Models, actresses, heiresses. Why choose a small-town librarian who doesn't even know how to wear high heels?" Preston turned to her. There was something intense in his eyes. He took her glass and placed it on the table along with his. Then he took her hands in his. "Because all those women wanted the Preston Hale who appears in magazines. They wanted the money, the power, the status. But you saw the man behind all of that. You challenged me, made me laugh, made me think, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to pretend to be something else." He raised his hand and caressed her face, his thumb tracing the line from her cheek to her chin. "You make me want to be real, Maddie. And that's rarer than any fortune I own." Maddie felt tears sting her eyes. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for your world." "You're stronger than you think," he said, leaning closer. "And I'll be by your side always." Their faces were so close now that she could feel his breath mixing with hers. Her heartbeat was irregular, wild. She could see every detail. The small lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble, the intensity of the gaze that undressed her without removing a piece of clothing. "Preston," she whispered, not quite sure what she was asking for. "Say the word and I'll stop," he murmured, his lips brushing against hers. "Say it and I'll never touch you again." But Maddie said nothing. Instead, she closed the small distance between them and kissed him. The kiss started soft, almost hesitant, but quickly transformed into something deeper, more urgent. Preston's hands rose to her hair, his fingers tangled in the loose strands as he pulled her closer. Maddie let out a small moan, and that sound nearly made Preston lose all the control he was maintaining. He gently laid her down on the sofa, covering her body with his, but being careful not to crush her. His hands explored with reverence the contour of her waist, the curve of her hip, the soft skin of her neck. Each touch drew sighs from her that set him on fire inside. "Maddie," he gasped against her lips. "If you want to stop, tell me now, because in a minute I won't be able to." She looked into his eyes. There was desire there, but there was also fear. "I don't want to stop," she whispered. "But I've never—" Preston froze, understanding immediately. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. His eyes were soft and full of tenderness. "It doesn't have to be today. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. When you're ready, I'll be here." Maddie felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "You're not disappointed?" Preston smiled and kissed her forehead with infinite affection. "I'm in love. And that's much more important than anything else." They stayed there, intertwined on the sofa, exchanging slow kisses and gentle caresses until the first lights of morning began to paint the sky. And that night, without either of them needing to say it out loud, both knew there was no going back. They had surrendered completely to each other. 2 weeks had passed since that night at Preston's house, and something had changed between them. It wasn't just the intensity of feelings, it was certainty. The silent conviction that what they shared was real, deep, and absolutely inevitable. Preston canceled international trips, rescheduled important commitments, and delegated responsibilities he had previously considered non-transferable. His partners began asking questions, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, there was someone more important than business. Maddie had changed too. She smiled more, laughed easily. Her co-workers noticed the new sparkle in her eyes, the lightness in her steps. She was allowing herself to dream, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be happy. On a rainy Friday in November, Preston showed up at the library just before closing. Maddie was alone, organizing the last books of the day. When she heard the door open and saw who it was, her heart skipped a beat. "I thought you were in Boston," she said, setting the books down on the table. "I was," Preston replied, walking toward her with determined steps. "But I decided there was a much more important place I should be." He stopped in front of her, and Maddie saw something different in his eyes, a determination, an urgency that made her hold her breath. "Get your coat." "But what?" "Why?" "Because I want to show you something, and I won't take no for an answer." Maddie laughed, shaking her head in surrender. "You're impossible. And you love me for it," he teased with a smile. She felt her heart skip a beat. It was the first time the word love had appeared between them, even indirectly. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. She just grabbed her coat and followed him outside. Preston drove through town and then took the road up the mountain. Rain beat against the windshield in a steady rhythm, and the wipers worked frantically. Maddie looked out the window, watching the fog-covered trees pass like silent ghosts. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see," Preston replied, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. They drove for almost 40 minutes until they reached the top of a hill. There, isolated and majestic, stood an old lookout tower that seemed forgotten by time. Preston parked the car and quickly got out, running to Maddie's side to open the door and hold an umbrella over her. "Preston, it's raining hard." "What are we doing here?" she protested, laughing as he pulled her by the hand. "Trust me," he said. And there was so much sincerity in his voice that she couldn't resist. They climbed the stone steps of the tower, the rain soaking their clothes despite the umbrella. When they reached the top, Maddie gasped. The view was breathtaking. Even with the rain, even with the fog, they could see the valley stretching below like a dark green sea. The lights of small towns twinkled in the distance like fallen stars. The sky was heavy with clouds, but there were gaps where rays of silver light escaped, creating an ethereal spectacle. "It's beautiful," Maddie whispered in wonder. Preston pulled her close, hugging her from behind, wrapping her in his coat. "I used to come here when I was a teenager," he confessed. "Whenever the world suffocated me, I'd drive up here and spend hours staring into the emptiness. It reminded me of how small I was, insignificant." Maddie turned in his arms, looking at him with surprise. "You never told me that." "Because I never brought anyone here," he said, caressing her wet face. "This place was always just mine, my refuge, my secret." "Then why did you bring me?" she asked, her voice choked. Preston held her face between his hands, looking deep into her eyes. "Because I don't want secrets anymore. Not with you. I want you to see all parts of me, the beautiful and the broken. I want you to know who I really am." Maddie felt tears mix with the rain on her face. "Preston, I love you, Maddie," he said, and the words came out with a force that surprised him. "I love you in a way I didn't even know was possible. You came into my life like a silent storm and changed absolutely everything, and I don't want to live a single day without you anymore." Maddie sobbed. Emotions overflowed. "I love you too," she confessed, her voice trembling but certain. "I love you so much it scares me." Preston smiled, a wide, genuine smile full of pure joy, and then he kissed her. But this kiss was different from all the others. It was a kiss that carried promises. A kiss that said, "I choose you today and always." A kiss that was at once soft and hungry, tender and desperate. The rain fell around them, soaking their clothes, plastering their hair to their foreheads, but neither of them cared. They were lost in each other, completely oblivious to the world. Preston pulled her closer. His hands slid down her waist, over her hips, up her back. Maddie clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world spinning out of control. Their lips met repeatedly, deep, slow kisses charged with desire and love in equal measure. "I want you," Preston whispered against her lips, his voice rough. "Not just today, forever." Maddie gasped. Her body molded to his instinctively. She felt his warmth through the wet clothes, felt the urgency in his touch, in the way he held her, as if afraid she would disappear. "I'm yours," she whispered back. I always have been. Preston groaned low. The sound vibrated in his chest. He pressed her against the stone wall of the tower, covering her body with his, protecting her from the rain and wind. His hands explored with reverence, touching, memorizing, worshipping every inch of her. He kissed her neck, feeling the rapid pulse under his lips. He kissed the line of her jaw, her earlobe, the sensitive spot just below. Each touch drew sighs from her that set him on fire inside. "Not here," he murmured against her skin, fighting his own desire. "When I have you for the first time, it will be in a place where I can worship you the way you deserve." Maddie trembled not from cold but from anticipation. "When?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. Preston pulled back slightly, looking deeply into her eyes. "When you're ready. No rush. No pressure." She touched his face, running her fingers along the strong line of his jaw. "I'm ready," she said with conviction. "I'm ready for everything with you." Something changed in Preston's gaze, a mixture of desire, love, and responsibility. He knew that what would happen between them would be more than just physical. It would be the complete union of two souls who had found each other against all odds. "Then come with me," he said, taking her hand. They ran down from the tower, laughing like children while the rain continued to punish them. Preston opened the car door and helped Maddie in, then ran to the driver's side. Inside the car, both were soaked, shivering, but unable to stop smiling. "Where to now?" Maddie asked, still breathless. Preston started the engine and looked at her with an intensity that made her melt. "Home. Our home." And as they drove down the dark, rainy road holding hands, Maddie knew her life would never be the same. She had surrendered completely, and she was ready to discover where this journey would take them. But neither of them imagined that the world out there was about to discover them, and when the news leaked, everything would get much more complicated. For now, though, they had that night, and that night would be theirs alone. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with an impossible blue sky that seemed to mock the previous night's storm. Preston woke before Maddie, watching her sleep beside him. She was turned toward him, one hand under her face. Her hair spread across the pillow like a dark halo. The sunlight coming through the window created golden patterns on her bare skin. He still couldn't believe it. After years building walls around his heart, she had entered and demolished everything with frightening ease. And he didn't care. In fact, he had never felt so alive. Preston reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Maddie stirred, opening her eyes slowly. When she saw him, a lazy, shy smile appeared on her lips. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice still husky with sleep. "Good morning, my love," he replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. They stayed there for a few more minutes, lost in their own world, oblivious to what was about to happen outside. It was Preston's phone that broke the bubble of peace. It rang insistently on the nightstand, vibrating with an urgency that couldn't be ignored. Preston frowned and picked up the device. There were 17 missed calls from his press secretary. "This isn't good," he murmured, sitting up in bed. Before he could return the call, the phone rang again. He answered. "Mark." "What? Where the hell are you?" The secretary's voice exploded from the other end. "Have you seen the news?" "What news?" Preston asked. A chill ran down his spine. "Check your email now." Preston opened the laptop on the dresser and accessed his inbox. The first email contained links to various gossip sites and tabloids. He clicked on the first one and felt his blood run cold. The headline screamed, "Billionaire Preston Hale caught in secret romance with small-town librarian." Below were photos of him and Maddie at the observation tower kissing in the rain, photos of them leaving the library together, photos of him holding her hand as they walked through the streets of Havenbrook. "Shit," Preston hissed. Maddie sat up beside him, pulling the sheet to cover her body. "What's wrong?" He turned the screen toward her and saw the color drain from her face. Her hands began to tremble. "Preston, how did they... Who took these photos? She stammered, her eyes wide with panic. Paparazzi. Someone must have followed me, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I should have been more careful. I should have protected you from this. Maddie kept scrolling down the page, reading the headlines with growing horror. Who is the woman who won the heart of New York's most eligible bachelor? From librarian to Cinderella. Preston Hale's unlikely love story. Source close to the couple reveals he's completely smitten with her. Some articles were relatively respectful, painting the story as a modern fairy tale. Others were cruel, insinuating that Maddie was a gold digger, that she had deliberately seduced Preston, that she was nothing more than an opportunist disguised as innocent. They're saying that I only want your money, Maddie whispered. Tears streamed down her face. They're turning me into a villain. Preston tossed the laptop aside and pulled Maddie into his arms. No, don't let these people define who you are. They don't know you. They don't know anything about us. But everyone will believe them. She sobbed against his chest. My whole life was quiet, invisible. And now the whole world is looking at me, judging, making assumptions. Preston held her face between his hands, forcing her to look at him. Then let them look. Let them judge. They're seeing the woman who saved me, the woman who showed me what real love is. And I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to pretend you're not the best thing that ever happened to me. In the following hours, Preston's phone didn't stop ringing. Partners wanting to know if the scandal would affect business, friends if they could be called that offering, unsolicited advice, his mother calling from Paris saying he was being reckless and needed to control the situation. Preston hung up on her. He sent a brief and direct statement to the press through his secretary. My personal life is private. Malign Carter is an extraordinary person, and any speculation about our intentions or character will be dealt with through legal action if necessary. But that only fueled the frenzy more. When Preston finally took Maddie back to Havenbrook, there were reporters camped outside the library and her small apartment. Cameras flashed as soon as the car stopped. Microphones were pushed against the windows. Voices shouted questions from all sides. Mellon, is it true you and Preston are engaged? How did you meet, Mr. Hale? Do your parents approve of the relationship? Maddie froze in the passenger seat, her eyes wide with terror. Preston saw her vulnerability and felt a deep, visceral anger rise up his throat. He got out of the car with an expression so fierce that the reporters instinctively backed away. Then he opened Maddie's door, wrapped his arm around her, and guided her through the crowd, using his body as a shield. No comment, he growled at the cameras. Back off, or I'm calling the police. They managed to get into Maddie's apartment, and Preston locked the door behind them. Maddie collapsed on the sofa, burying her face in her hands. I can't do this, she said between sobs. I can't live like this with people chasing me, invading my privacy, saying horrible things about me. Preston knelt in front of her, holding her hands. I know it's scary. I know it's not fair, but I promise I'll protect you. I'll move mountains if I have to. What if it's not enough? She asked, looking at him with red eyes. What if this world turns you back into the Preston you were before you met me? The man who didn't believe in love? That will never happen, he said with absolute conviction. You changed something fundamental in me, Maddie, and there's no going back. That night, Preston refused to leave her alone. He sent private security to surround the building, blocking the entrance of any unauthorized person. Inside the small apartment, he made tea for her, covered her with a blanket, and simply held her while she tried to process the new reality. I broke contracts today, Preston confessed, in the darkness of the bedroom. I yelled at people I consider partners. I pushed away friends who said bad things about you. Maddie turned to look at him. Preston, you can't blow up your life because of me. It's not because of you, he corrected. It's with you. There's a difference. And if these people can't understand that, then they don't deserve to be part of my life. In the following days, the media storm continued. But something interesting began to happen. People from Havenbrook, Maddie's neighbors, library patrons, local shop owners began giving interviews defending her. They talked about her kindness, her volunteer work in the community, how she had helped children learn to read for free. The narrative began to shift. Suddenly it was no longer gold-digging librarian. It was simple, kind woman who won the billionaire's heart. And Preston made sure to feed that narrative. He began appearing publicly with Maddie. He took her to dinners at high-end restaurants, where he held her hand on the table without caring who was watching. They walked through Central Park, his arm around her, kissing her forehead while cameras clicked in the distance. In a quick interview given at the door of a charity event, when a reporter asked if he had anything to say about the relationship, Preston stopped, looked directly at the camera, and said, "Let them look. They're seeing the woman who saved me." The clip went viral. Within 48 hours it was on every news site, on every social media platform, and public opinion began to turn in their favor. But not everything was rosy. Preston's old acquaintances began appearing, giving interviews insinuating that he was fickle, that he would soon tire of Maddie. Business partners expressed concern that he was too distracted to lead the company. And through it all, Maddie struggled to stay strong. One night, lying together in her bedroom, Preston felt her silent tears wet his chest. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes," he whispered, echoing words she had said before. "But I'd rather lose everything trying than give up now." Maddie raised her face to look at him. "You'll never lose me," she promised. "I just need to learn to be strong enough for this world." "You already are," Preston said, kissing her forehead. "You just need to believe it." And as the city slept outside, they held each other tighter, knowing the battle wasn't over yet. But as long as they were together, no judgment from the world could break them. 3 weeks had passed since news of the relationship had leaked. The media storm had begun to calm down, transforming into genuine curiosity, and to Maddie's surprise, even support. People seemed fascinated by the story, the ruthless billionaire who found redemption in the arms of a simple, sincere woman. Preston had made a decision. He wanted to take Maddie away from it all, even if temporarily. He wanted a place where they could simply be without invasive stares, without hidden cameras, without judgments. He owned a seaside house on the coast of Maine, an isolated refuge that few knew about. It was a place he escaped to when the weight of the world became unbearable, and now he wanted to share it with her. A vacation? Maddie repeated incredulously when he suggested it. "Preston, I can't just abandon my work for a week." "I already talked to your boss," he said with a mischievous smile. She agreed. "Said you deserve a break after everything you've been through." Maddie shook her head, laughing. "You're impossible, and you love me for it," he teased, pulling her into a kiss. 2 days later they were on the road. Preston drove his sports car along the coast with the windows open and the salty smell of the sea filling the interior. Maddie had her feet up on the dashboard, her hair flying in the wind, and for the first time in weeks she was smiling without reservation. The house was spectacular, but in a completely different way from the mountain residence. Built of light, wood, and glass, it nestled over the rocks, as if it were part of the landscape itself. The sound of waves breaking against the cliffs was constant, hypnotic, comforting. "Preston, this is incredible," Maddie whispered, standing on the deck that opened directly to the ocean. He hugged her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Welcome to our little piece of paradise." They spent the first few days just existing together. Beach walks at dawn with bare feet sinking into the cold sand, afternoons reading side by side on the deck with shared blankets and cups of hot chocolate, evenings preparing simple dinners together, laughing when Preston burned something or when Maddie spilled sauce on the floor. It was simple. It was perfect. And with each day, the tension between them grew, not an uncomfortable tension, but a delicious anticipation, a constant awareness of the desire pulsing just below the surface. On the fourth night, after a candlelit dinner on the deck, Preston and Maddie sat in silence watching the ocean under the moonlight. The air was charged with something unspoken, something inevitable. Preston turned to her. Maddie saw in his eyes everything he felt. Love, desire, reverence, need. "Maddie," he said, his voice low. "If you're not ready, I understand. We can wait as long as it takes. But I need you to know, I've never wanted anyone the way I want you." Maddie felt her heart race. She knew this moment would come, and for the first time she didn't feel fear. She felt certainty. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I want to be yours completely." Something changed in Preston's gaze. A fire ignited there, burning and intense. He stood up and extended his hand to her. Maddie placed her hand in his, and he guided her into the house toward the bedroom. The bedroom was simple but elegant, with huge windows overlooking the ocean. White sheets covered the king-size bed. Candles were already lit. Preston had prepared everything in advance, hoping, wanting, but never pressuring. He closed the door behind them and turned to Maddie. For a moment he just looked at her, memorizing every detail. The way the soft candlelight danced on her face, the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the vulnerability and trust he saw in her eyes. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, approaching slowly. Preston raised his hand and touched her face with infinite delicacy. His thumb traced the line of her cheek, descending to her lips. Maddie closed her eyes, leaning into the touch. He kissed her, then a soft, exploratory kiss full of promises. His hands slid down her arms to hold her hands, intertwining their fingers. He pulled her closer until their bodies touched, and Maddie felt his warmth through their clothes. The kiss deepened, became more urgent. Preston's hands rose up her back, exploring the curve of her spine, the softness of the skin under her blouse. Maddie let out a trembling sigh, and that sound nearly undid his control. "May I?" he asked, his fingers playing with the first button of her blouse. "Yes," she whispered. He pressed and undid each button with torturous slowness, revealing her skin inch by inch. He kissed every exposed part, her collarbone, the space between her breasts, the line of her stomach. Maddie trembled under the touches. Her hands gripped his shoulders to stay standing. When the blouse finally fell to the floor, Preston pulled back slightly to look at her. Maddie stood there in a simple white lace bra, her cheeks flushed, her lips swollen from kisses. "Perfect," he murmured. "You're absolutely perfect." Maddie, gathering courage, brought her hands to his shirt and began to unbutton it. Her hands trembled slightly, but Preston didn't rush. He let her explore at her own pace. When his shirt fell, Maddie placed her hands on his bare chest, feeling the muscles under the skin, his heart beating fast. She leaned in and kissed the center of his chest, and Preston groaned low. He lifted her in his arms. Maddie gave a small cry of surprise and carried her to the bed, laying her gently on the white sheets. He positioned himself over her, being careful not to crush her with his weight. "If at any point you want to stop, tell me," he whispered, looking deep into her eyes. "Promise?" "I promise," she replied, touching his face tenderly. Preston kissed her again, this time with more passion. His hands explored every inch of her, the curve of her waist, the softness of her hips, the soft skin of her thighs. Each touch drew sighs and low moans that set him on fire. He removed her bra carefully and then stopped just to admire her. Maddie felt the urge to cover herself, but the way he looked at her with absolute adoration made her feel beautiful, desired, precious. "You're everything, Maddie," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Let me show you." And then he showed her with gentle touches, burning kisses, whispers of love between caresses. Preston worshipped her with a patience and reverence that made her cry, not from pain or fear, but from pure and overwhelming love. When they finally joined, Maddie held her breath. There was a moment of discomfort, but Preston stopped immediately, kissing her tears, murmuring words of comfort. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tense from the effort to control himself. "I am," she whispered, wrapping her legs around him. "Don't stop. Please don't stop." And he didn't stop. They moved together in an ancient and sacred dance, their bodies finding a perfect rhythm, low moans mixed with whispers of love. Maddie's hands gripped his back, her nails leaving red marks on his skin. "You make me want to be better," Preston whispered, his forehead pressed against hers, eyes closed from intense pleasure. "You complete me, Maddie." When they finally reached climax together, it was as if the world stopped. They clung to each other, trembling, breathless, completely lost in the intensity of the moment. Afterward, lying among rumpled sheets, Preston wrapped her in his arms, pulling her to rest against his chest. Maddie absent-mindedly caressed his chest, feeling his still racing heart under her palm. Preston played with strands of her hair, wrapping them around his fingers, kissing her forehead repeatedly with infinite tenderness. "I love you," he whispered in the darkness, "more than words can express." "I love you too," Maddie replied, nestling closer. "Forever." The afterglow was silent, full of affection and contentment. The sound of the waves outside was like a lullaby, and there in that seaside refuge, with the world outside forgotten, they had become one and nothing would ever be able to separate them. The return to reality was more brutal than either of them had imagined. The week by the sea had been a dream, a perfect pause in the chaos of their lives. But as soon as Preston's car crossed the New York City limits, the magic began to dissipate, replaced by the suffocating pressure of the real world. Preston had accumulated meetings, urgent decisions that could no longer wait, and partners visibly irritated with his extended absence. Maddie returned to Havenbrook only to discover that the library was being harassed by journalists, searching for any crumb of information about the romance of the century. They tried to maintain normalcy. Preston drove to Havenbrook whenever he could, sometimes staying only a few hours before having to return for unavoidable commitments. Maddie visited New York on weekends, staying at his apartment, trying to get used to the excessive luxury that still made her uncomfortable. But the cracks began to appear. It all started when Isabella Montlaire reappeared. Isabella was everything Maddie wasn't. A French heiress of stunning beauty with platinum blonde hair, a sculpted body, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She and Preston had had an affair years ago, nothing serious, just casual encounters when convenient for both. But Isabella had never really gotten over Preston, and now, seeing him in love with another woman, she decided it was time to get him back. The first time Maddie saw her was at a gala event Preston had convinced her to attend. Maddie wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress with a discreet neckline and perfect fit. She felt out of place among diamonds and haute couture gowns, but Preston held her hand firmly, whispering words of encouragement in her ear. That's when Isabella approached. She glided through the hall like an elegant serpent, her blood-red dress clinging to her body like a second skin, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Preston with an intimacy that made Maddie's stomach sink. "Preston, darling," Isabella purred, completely ignoring Maddie. "It's been so long. Have you been avoiding me?" Preston tensed beside Maddie but maintained his composure. "Isabella, I didn't know you were in town." "I came back a few weeks ago," she replied, finally directing her gaze to Maddie with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be the famous librarian. How charming." The tone was sweet, but the poison was there, hidden under each syllable. Maddie felt her face burn but forced a polite smile. "Maddie, it's a pleasure to meet you." "I'm sure," Isabella said, before turning her attention back to Preston. "We need to talk about the Riviera project. You remember, don't you? We spent 3 divine weeks planning that." Preston squeezed Maddie's hand, a silent gesture of reassurance. "Any business discussion can be scheduled with my office." Isabella laughed, a crystalline, calculated sound. "Always so formal, Preston. You used to be much more relaxed with me." Maddie felt anger rise up her throat, but she also felt something more dangerous, insecurity. Isabella was dazzling, sophisticated, perfectly suited to Preston's world. And Maddie? She was just a small-town girl who didn't know which fork to use at formal dinners. When Isabella finally walked away, Preston immediately turned to Maddie. "Ignore her. She's trying to provoke you. She's beautiful," Maddie whispered, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. "And completely empty," Preston replied, turning her face to force her to look at him. "You're real. You're genuine. And that's why I love you." But the seeds of doubt had already been planted. In the following days, Isabella seemed to be everywhere. She appeared at events Preston attended, always with some business excuse. She sent him text messages about urgent matters that were never really urgent. She posted old photos on social media, her and Preston on yachts, at exclusive parties, always touching each other intimately. And the press loved it. Headlines began to speculate whether Preston was really happy with Maddie or if he was just going through a phase before returning to his usual type of woman. Maddie tried not to read them, but it was impossible. The comparisons were inevitable and cruel. One night, when Preston arrived at her apartment late, he found Maddie sitting on the living room floor surrounded by printouts of articles and photos. "What is this?" he asked, alarmed. "This is me trying to understand why you're with me," she said, her voice trembling. "Look at her, Preston. Look at all these women who have been in your life. They're perfect. And you're everything," Preston interrupted, kneeling beside her and scattering all those papers across the floor. "You're the only one who really sees me, the only one who makes me want to be more than just an empty empire." "But what if you get tired?" Maddie asked. Tears streamed down her face. "What if one day you wake up and realize you made a mistake, that I'm not enough for your world?" Preston held her face between his hands firmly. "Maddie, look at me. Look at me." She obeyed. Her brown eyes met his. "I love you so much. It scares me sometimes. But I'd rather lose everything trying than give up now," he said, echoing words that had already become a mantra between them. "And if you leave me because of insecurity, because of what others say, that will be the only thing that will really destroy me." Maddie sobbed, clinging to him. "I'm just afraid I'm not strong enough." "You're the strongest person I know," Preston whispered, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips salty with tears. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." But the tests continued. Business partners began openly questioning Preston's decisions, suggesting he was too distracted with his relationship. A particularly cruel article in a business magazine speculated that his romantic obsession was affecting his business judgment. Preston responded, the only way he knew how, with action. He scheduled a meeting with all his main partners and made it absolutely clear, "My personal life is not up for discussion. Melleen Carter is the woman I love, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave the company now." No one moved, but the tension in the air was palpable. At night, Preston returned home, whether in Havenbrook or New York, visibly exhausted. Maddie saw the lines of worry deepening in his face, saw the way his shoulders carried the weight of battles he fought silently. "You don't have to defend me all the time," she said one night while massaging his tense shoulders. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." Preston turned and pulled her onto his lap. "You don't understand, do you? Without you, all of this means nothing. The business, the money, the power, it's all empty if I don't have you by my side." "But—" "No," he interrupted, kissing her deeply. "There's no but. You're my choice every day, in every circumstance." And then Isabella made her final move. She arranged an interview on a major television program where she revealed, with carefully calculated tears, that she and Preston had had a deep romance that she believed would result in marriage. She insinuated that Maddie was a temporary distraction and that Preston would soon come to his senses. The interview went viral within hours. When Maddie saw it, she felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her feet. She called Preston, her voice breaking. "Is it true? Did you love her?" "No," Preston said without hesitation. Never. It was just sex, Maddie. It was never love. It was never even close to what I have with you. But she said, "She's lying," Preston interrupted, his voice firm but desperate. "She's trying to separate us. Don't let her succeed, Maddie. Please." Maddie took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "I trust you," she finally said. "I trust us." And that was the turning point. The next day, Preston gave his own interview. He sat before the cameras with lethal calm and dismantled every lie Isabella had told. He presented emails, messages, concrete proof that their relationship had never been anything more than casual. And then, looking directly at the camera, he said, "Mylene Carter is the love of my life, and anyone who tries to separate us will discover exactly how far I'm willing to go to protect what I have with her." The public declaration silenced many critics. Isabella retreated, humiliated, and slowly the storm began to calm, but the scars remained. That night, lying together in bed, Maddie traced her fingers over Preston's face in the dark. "You fought for me," she whispered. "I'll always fight," he replied, kissing her palm. "Because you're worth every battle." And in that moment, Maddie knew that no matter how many storms were still to come, as long as they had each other, they would survive. March arrived with an unexpected coldness, as if winter itself refused to give way to spring. Preston sat in his office on the 40th floor, looking at the city through the panoramic windows but not really seeing anything. His mind was miles away in a small library in Havenbrook, where Maddie was probably organizing books with that gentle smile he loved so much. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Marcus Chen, his vice president, and one of the few true friends he had. "Preston, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice deep and serious. "It's about Tokyo." Preston closed his eyes, knowing exactly what was coming. "Tell me." "The negotiation is falling apart. The Japanese investors are threatening to pull out completely. They want you there personally and not for a few days. We're talking at least 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. 2 months, Preston repeated, feeling the weight of the words. "It's a $400 million project, Preston. If we lose this, we'll have to lay off at least 200 people. You know that." Preston ran a hand over his face, exhausted. He knew. Of course he knew. But the idea of being 2 months away from Maddie was like imagining living without air. "When do I need to be there?" he asked, his voice resigned. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "I know," Marcus interrupted gently. "But we don't have a choice. The company needs you. 200 families need you." Preston hung up the phone and sat in silence for long minutes. Then he grabbed his car keys and left without saying a word to anyone. 2 hours later he was in Havenbrook, entering the library just before closing. Maddie was alone, putting away the last books of the day. When she saw Preston, her face lit up with that smile that always made his heart race. "Preston, I didn't know you were coming today," she said, walking to him and rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. The kiss should have been quick, casual. But Preston held her as if he were saying goodbye, and Maddie felt something shift. She pulled back, studying his face. "What's wrong? What happened?" "I need to go to Tokyo," he said, getting straight to the point. "Tomorrow. For at least 2 months." The color drained from Maddie's face. 2 months. An important deal is falling apart. "If I don't go, the company will sink, and hundreds of people will lose their jobs," Preston explained, holding her hands. "I don't have a choice, Maddie." She swallowed hard, fighting back the tears burning her eyes. "I understand. Of course I understand. It's your job, your responsibility." "Come with me," Preston said suddenly, his voice desperate. "Come to Tokyo. We can be together. I'll show you the city." "Preston, I can't just abandon my life here," Maddie interrupted gently. "The library needs me. And I can't live in your shadow, following you around the world without having my own purpose." Preston knew she was right. But that didn't make the situation any less painful. "Then we'll make it work long distance," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. "Video calls every day, messages anytime, and I'll come back as soon as possible." Maddie clung to him, burying her face in his chest. "I'm going to miss you so much." "Me too," he whispered, kissing the top of her head. "But this doesn't change anything between us. You understand?" Nothing. They spent that night together in her apartment, making love with desperate intensity, as if they wanted to engrave every touch, every moan, every whisper in their memory. And when morning came, both had red eyes and heavy hearts. Preston left at noon. Maddie stood on the sidewalk, watching the car disappear around the bend in the road, feeling as if a part of her had gone away with him. The first few weeks were torturous. Preston kept his promise. He called every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times. They talked about everything. Her day at the library, his frustrating negotiations, plans for when he returned. But it wasn't enough. The video calls only served to remind them both how far apart they were. Maddie began to feel the emptiness in ways she didn't expect. The bed seemed too big. The silence of the apartment was deafening. She found herself picking up the phone to send him a message only to realize he was sleeping because of the time difference. Preston, meanwhile, buried himself in work. 16-hour meetings, exhausting negotiations, business dinners that stretched into the early hours. But when he finally arrived at the empty hotel, loneliness consumed him. He slept with his phone beside him, waiting for Maddie to wake up so they could talk, even if just for a few minutes. It was during the 5th week that everything changed. Preston was in a particularly difficult meeting when he received an urgent call from Marcus. He left the room irritated. "What is it?" "You need to see this," Marcus said, sending a link. Preston opened it. It was an article from a Havenbrook newspaper. The headline read, "Local library faces closure due to lack of funds." Preston's heart sank as he read. The small library where Maddie worked was on the brink of financial collapse. Without sufficient municipal funding and with accumulated debts, the city council had voted for closure in 60 days. He immediately called Maddie. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded as soon as she answered. There was a long pause. "How did you know?" "That doesn't matter. Why didn't you tell me, Maddie?" Because you already have enough problems. And because this isn't your responsibility," she said, her voice tired. "What do you mean it's not my responsibility?" "You're my responsibility. Your world is my responsibility," Preston practically shouted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Preston, I can't come running to you every time I have a problem," Maddie replied, and he could hear the tears in her voice. "I need to learn to deal with things on my own." "Why? Why do you have to do everything alone?" "Because eventually you might not be there," she exploded. And then there was silence. Preston felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "What are you saying?" Maddie sobbed on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Preston. I don't know if I can do this. Being away from you for so long, feeling like our life is always taking a back seat to work, to the company, to crises. I love you so much. But—" "No," Preston interrupted, his voice trembling. "Don't say but, Maddie, please. I just need some time to think," she whispered. "To figure out who I am without you constantly saving me." And then she hung up. Preston stood in the middle of the hotel corridor, the phone still in his hand, feeling the world crumble around him. He didn't sleep that night, not the next one either. He functioned on autopilot. Meetings, signatures, decisions. But inside, he was broken. It was Marcus who finally confronted him. "Man, you look like a zombie. What's going on?" "I think I lost her," Preston said, his voice empty. "Then what are you doing here?" Marcus asked, as if the answer were obvious. Preston blinked. "I have responsibilities. The deal is practically closed. You know that. The Japanese are happy. The contracts are being drafted. You're here out of stubbornness, not necessity." Preston looked at his friend. The truth of those words finally penetrated. "So go," Marcus said, pushing him toward the door. "Go get the woman you love before it's too late." Preston didn't need more convincing. He caught the first flight to New York. 18 hours later, dirty, exhausted, unshaven, and with red eyes, Preston knocked on Maddie's apartment door at 3 in the morning. Maddie opened the door, shocked. She also looked like she'd spent nights without sleep. Swollen eyes, messy hair, wrapped in an old robe. "Preston, what are you?" He entered, took her face between his hands, and kissed her with desperation, with love, with promise. When they separated, both were crying. "You're my home, Maddie," he said, his voice broken. "There's no world where I live without you. I don't care about Tokyo, about business, about any of it. If I have to choose between the Empire and you, I choose you. I'll always choose you." Maddie sobbed, clinging to him. "I'm sorry. I was scared of not being strong enough, of always needing you." "You're the strongest person I know," Preston interrupted, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "And there's no shame in needing someone. I need you too desperately." They made love that night, slower, deeper, more tender than ever before, as if it were the first time again, as if they were rediscovering each other, reconnecting, healing. Afterward, lying among tangled sheets, Preston played with strands of her hair. "I solved the library problem," he said softly. Maddie raised her head, surprised. "How?" "I created an anonymous donation fund. The library won't just stay open, it'll have resources for expansion, new books, community programs, everything." Tears streamed down Maddie's face. "Preston, you don't need to thank me. You gave me true purpose, showed me that money means something when it's used to create meaning," he said, pulling her closer. "And I'm never going to stay away like that again. I'll find ways to balance, to be present. I'll be better too," Maddie promised. "I'll stop being afraid. I'll trust more." Preston smiled and kissed her deeply. "We'll figure it out together." And that night, in the silence of the room, they made a silent promise. They would never again allow distance to separate them, because what they had was too rare, too precious, too real to let slip away. 6 months had passed since that night when Preston returned from Tokyo, and everything changed not dramatically or suddenly, but with the smoothness of transforming seasons, inevitable, natural, perfect. Preston completely reorganized his life. He promoted Marcus to co-CEO, dividing responsibilities and delegating with a confidence he didn't possess before. He bought a property between New York and Havenbrook, a middle ground where both could live without completely sacrificing their worlds. The house was smaller than his other residences, but it had something the others never had: warmth. Huge windows that let the light in, a complete library for Maddie, a fireplace where they spent nights reading together. Maddie also changed. She accepted a position as regional director of libraries, a role that allowed her to travel, influence cultural policies, and make a difference on a larger scale. Preston encouraged her every step of the way, attending her presentations, celebrating each victory as if it were his own. They learned to dance together, not perfectly, but authentically. They learned that love wasn't about never fighting, but about always finding each other on the other side of the argument. They learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the purest form of courage. And then, on a warm September afternoon, Preston took Maddie back to that observation tower where everything had changed between them. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange, pink, and purple. The valley below stretched out like a tapestry of gold and green. The wind blew gently, bringing the smell of wet earth and dry leaves. "Why did we come back here?" Maddie asked, smiling as Preston guided her to the same place where they had kissed months ago. Preston didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took her hands in his, looking deep into her eyes, with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "Because it was here that I realized I couldn't live without you," he said, his voice firm but loaded with emotion. It was here that you became mine forever, even before I had the courage to admit it." Maddie felt tears burn her eyes. "Preston," and then he knelt. The world seemed to stop. The wind, the birds, even Maddie's heartbeat, everything froze in that moment, suspended in time. Preston took a small velvet box from his pocket. When he opened it, Maddie gasped. The ring was simple but absolutely perfect. A dark blue sapphire surrounded by small diamonds set in white gold. It wasn't ostentatious. It was her. "Malene Carter," Preston began, and his voice trembled slightly. "You came into my life like a silent storm and changed absolutely everything. You taught me that wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in stolen moments. You showed me that power isn't controlling everything, but having the courage to surrender. You gave me something I never knew. I needed a home. Not a place, but a person. You." Tears flowed freely down Maddie's face now. She covered her mouth with her hands, unable to form words. "I don't promise it will be easy. I don't promise perfection. But I promise I'll wake up every day and choose you. I'll fight for us. I'll love you on the good days and hold you on the bad ones. I'll be your safe harbor when the world is too cruel, and your biggest cheerleader when you want to fly." He continued, his own voice breaking. "So, Maddie, will you marry me?" Maddie couldn't speak. She just nodded, frantically sobbing, laughing, and crying at the same time. "I need to hear you say it," Preston said, smiling through his own tears. "Yes," she finally exclaimed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Preston slid the ring onto her finger and stood up, pulling her into a deep, passionate kiss full of promises. They kissed as the sun set behind them, bathing them in golden light, as if the universe itself were blessing that moment. The wedding took place 3 months later in December, in an intimate seaside ceremony at the main house. There weren't hundreds of guests. There was no press. There was no ostentation, just the people who truly mattered. A few close friends, dear colleagues, and Marcus as best man. Maddie wore a simple white silk dress with long sleeves and a discreet neckline. Her hair was loose, wavy from the salty wind, with small white flowers woven through the strands. She was barefoot in the sand exactly as she wanted. Preston wore a light gray suit, also barefoot, his eyes fixed on her as if nothing else in the world existed. When the officiant asked if he accepted Malene as his wife, Preston answered with a firm voice, "I do forever." And when they asked Maddie, she looked at Preston with a smile that shone brighter than the sun around them and said, "I do in every lifetime." The kiss that sealed the marriage was soft, tender, full of silent promises that only they understood. Life after the wedding was different from what Maddie had imagined. She had feared she would have to become someone she wasn't, wear uncomfortable clothes, attend empty events, smile at people who didn't care. But Preston never asked that of her. Instead, they created their own version of happiness. Maddie continued working, traveling to small towns to help struggling libraries. Preston accompanied her whenever he could, transforming work trips into shared adventures. They dined at simple restaurants as much as at sophisticated places. They spent weekends reading together as much as attending social events. Preston gave up meaningless parties, stopped caring what the elite thought of him, discovered he preferred quiet nights, with Maddie reading in his lap to any gala event. And Maddie discovered that her strength didn't come from being independent of Preston, but from choosing to walk beside him as an equal. She challenged him. He supported her. They grew together. One night, almost a year after the wedding, they were on the deck of the seaside house. The ocean roared softly in the background. The stars shone brightly in the sky without light pollution. Maddie sat between Preston's legs, her back resting against his chest. He absent-mindedly played with her fingers, occasionally kissing the top of her head. "Are you happy?" Preston asked suddenly, his voice low. Maddie turned her head slightly to look at him. "More than I ever imagined possible." "And you?" Preston smiled, that genuine, warm smile he reserved only for her. I used to measure happiness in numbers. How much money I made, how many buildings I owned, how many companies I conquered. He paused, pulling her closer. Now I measure it in moments like this, in waking up beside you, in hearing you laugh, in knowing that no matter what happens, I have you. Maddie turned completely in his arms, facing him with eyes shining with emotion. You know you saved me, right? Not from a bad life, but from an unlived life. You taught me to take risks, to dream, to believe I deserve extraordinary things. No, Preston corrected gently, caressing her face. We saved each other. You showed me there was more to life than power and control. And I showed you that you were always extraordinary, you just needed to believe it. He kissed her then with the tenderness of someone who knows they have a lifetime ahead. The ocean continued singing its eternal song. The stars witnessed silently, and in that small piece of paradise, two hearts that had found each other finally rested. Preston pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, savoring that moment of perfect peace. You're my most sincere prayer, Maddie, he whispered in the dark. My forever. Maddie smiled. Tears of happiness flowed silently. And you're my miracle, my home. And there, under the infinite sky, with the sea as witness and love as foundation, they knew they had found something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. They had found each other, and that was everything. It was absolutely everything. In the end, Preston Hale discovered that his life's greatest achievement wasn't in skyscrapers touching the sky or million-dollar contracts that made his empire grow. It was in learning to kneel not in defeat, but in surrender to love. Maddie taught him that vulnerability isn't weakness, but the courage to give your heart without guarantees. And together, they proved that the best loves aren't those that happen without obstacles, but those that choose to remain even when the whole world doubts. Sometimes the greatest act of power is recognizing that you need someone, and perhaps true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in who we choose to share our silent nights with, our secret fears, and our